Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. My wife, Reggie Littlejohn, is founder and president of a nonprofit organization called Women's Rights Without Frontiers. The purpose of the organization is to expose and oppose the human rights atrocities that happen in China related to China's coercive family planning under the Chinese Communist Party. I often collaborate with her work. In case you are not aware of it, for 40 years, the Chinese Communist Party has been limiting the number of children a family is allowed to have in China. Until a few years ago, the limit was 1. Now the limit is 2. But either way, it's important to understand that these policies are not voluntary. The two-child policy in China is not an educational campaign designed to encourage people and educate people to limit their families voluntarily. No, it's law. Therefore, any pregnancy above the limit of 2 is an illegal pregnancy. Think about that for a minute. An illegal pregnancy. That's hard for us Americans to get our minds around. What it means is that in China, a mother of 2 children who becomes pregnant again and tries to keep that baby becomes a criminal. And the child itself becomes illegal. The mother can be forcibly aborted, forcibly sterilized, and fined up to 10 times her annual income. If the father tries to protect his wife, he may be beaten or jailed. And even though right now, because of the demographic problems in China and the decrease in young people in relation to old people, that China is sort of easing back a little bit on the one-child policy. Nevertheless, it's true that the one-child policy is used as a weapon, as a means of control, population control against the Uyghur population in China, an ethnic Turkic population in China that is put into internment camps, forcibly aborted, forcibly sterilized, and treated with any number of human rights abuses. And you know what else? Did you know that political prisoners in China are genetically screened when they're imprisoned? You know why? Because the Chinese Communist Party practices organ harvesting. And political prisoners are the easiest way to get healthy organs. So why am I telling you this? These atrocities happen because in China, the Chinese Communist Party does not render unto God the things that are God's. Instead, in China, the CCP renders unto itself the power, the authority over things that are rightfully God's, like human life. And that happens because the Chinese Communist Party is officially atheistic. Communists believe that God does not exist, and there is no authority higher than their own authority. So as far as they are concerned, they themselves are God. In fact, did you know that as we sit here right now, worshiping God freely here in Baltimore, that somewhere in China there are Christians who are being forced to throw away crucifixes, to tear down pictures of Jesus, and instead to put in place of those pictures of Jesus, pictures of Xi Jinping or Mao Zedong. In many ways, the Chinese Communist Party is a modern embodiment of the totalitarian Caesars of Roman antiquity. Caesar and the CCP both put themselves in the place of God. Sure, a pretense is made of law, but the reality is that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, just like Caesar, does whatever it pleases. And inevitably, human rights abuses follow, just as sure as day follows the night. That's what happens when governments lose sight of God. Now, in the gospel for today, enemies of Jesus tried to trap him by asking him a trick question about taxes. Rabbi, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? See, they gave him only a yes or no choice. If Jesus said no, the Herodians, remember there were Herodians there and disciples of Pharisees there. If Jesus said no, the Herodians, who were loyal to Herod, could charge Jesus with treason for instigating a tax revolt against Rome. But if Jesus said yes, the Pharisees could publicly discredit Jesus in front of the people, in front of the crowds, as someone who is disloyal and unfaithful to Judaism. Yes or no? So Jesus answered brilliantly. It says, Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. A denarius, by the way, had an image of Caesar stamped upon it. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they said, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. In this short statement, Jesus forever established the proper hierarchy between human and divine authority. Yes, Christians are citizens of the state. But citizens and rulers alike must obey God, must render unto God the things that are God's, acknowledging his dominion over all human affairs. The coins had Caesar's image on it. The coins might have belonged to Caesar. But all things, the coins, Rome, Caesar himself, the earth, human life, come from the mind of God and are under God's dominion. That's the fact. Catholic moral theology always starts with God at the center. God is the author of creation, and God is the author of natural law. And God's natural law lies behind and informs all legitimate man-made laws and all legitimate governments. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote that for a law to be just or even valid, it must reflect the natural law given to us in the Ten Commandments. Since all authority comes from God, no earthly authority can legitimately declare good what God declares morally evil. It's just illegitimate. And the United States was built upon these ideas. According to the Declaration of Independence, our rights do not come from the state, do not come from King George. They come from God and God alone. Chief among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in that order, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The role of government in regard to these rights is to secure them and protect them equally and for all. And that's it. Now, we have this passage before us. And frankly, I don't see how we can have this passage before us today without mentioning the elephant in the room of the United States nation, which is the election coming up. This passage teaches us that the subordination of politics under the authority of God is not political, it is biblical. It's what we're supposed to do. So as we approach Election Day, here are some of my reflections. We must keep in mind Jesus' words, render to God the things that are God's. As Catholics, we know that there is no higher authority than God. Our loyalty is not to politicians, and our loyalty is not to political parties. It's to God alone, and to God's truth alone. Our priorities must align with God's priority. And first among those priorities, as it has always been, is the right to life, upon which all other rights are based. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, in a 2019 document called Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship, which is kind of like a voter's guide for Catholics, it affirms that, quote, the threat of abortion remains our preeminent priority because it directly attacks life itself, because it takes place within the sanctuary of the family, and because of the number of lives destroyed, end quote. As Catholics, we must weigh abortion heavily. In my opinion, more heavily than any other issue. And on that issue alone, there is a clear choice. And I would like to bring us back to where I started, with China and the Chinese Communist Party. Because the Chinese Communist Party shows what happens in a country that does not fear God. Frankly, I am alarmed by how many politicians glibly talk about socialism as if it were a desirable goal for the United States. Socialism is atheism. Catholics must resist it. Some try to draw a distinction between socialism and communism. But to them, I will say what Vladimir Lenin himself said. Lenin said, the goal of socialism is communism. Vladimir Lenin, the father of the Soviet Union and Soviet communism, said the goal of socialism is communism. And he should know. I began this homily by describing conditions that, oh my God. forgive me. Who was that? All right. I'm sorry. I began this homily by describing conditions that I know to be true in communist China. There's forced abortion, there's forced sterilization, there's organ harvesting from political prisoners. You and I would not want to live there. So why on earth would anyone want to bring those kind of human rights abuses here to the United States? That's a question that we need to ask any politician who suggests socialism is a good idea. I'll close with this. My wife has a colleague whose name is Jennifer Zhang. Jennifer Zhang was born in China. She survived a Chinese labor camp. She now lives in the Washington, D.C. area. The Chinese Communist Party forcibly aborted Jennifer's second child under the one-child policy. Later, they burst into her home in the middle of the night and dragged her off to a labor camp, the Laogai. When she asked why they were doing it, the police answered, "Because of your thought." Because of your thought. In communist China, the thought police are real. We need to listen to people like Jennifer Zhang, who said, socialists promise heaven on earth, but always end up giving you a one-way ticket to hell. That's what happens in a country when the people who run it have no respect for life or for God. A country in which the rulers do not render unto God that which is God's. They put themselves instead in the place of God. My prayer is that it never happen here.